Hi everyone, and welcome to today's News Roundup episode of Version of Events. I'm Jessica.
And I'm Ellie, and welcome to episode 2. Thanks to everybody who listened the first time. We were blown away by all the positive comments and support. So yeah, we're walking on air.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks everyone for all the listens and the shares and the feedback we got. It's been very much appreciated. So we've got a few cases to look at today. We have another 4, and today we actually have 2 recommendations from people, which is great.
Yeah, that's fab.
And so we're looking at we've had recommendation to look at the murder of Elianne Andam from Sue Barr. So thank you for that, Sue. Should we dive in, Ellie?
Yeah, let's dive into Elianne's case.
Perfect. So on the morning of Wednesday, 27th of September 2023, 15-year-old Elianne Andam was with her 2 best friends. Because of their ages, both being under 18, one of them is identified only as S. The other isn't identified at all. So we're going to call S Susie and the other girl Jane. And I think that's important. It's right that they're not identified by their actual names, but they do deserve to be given a name, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And it also makes the whole story more cohesive and easier to follow.
Yeah, right. So Susie was the former girlfriend of Hassan Sentamu, a 17-year-old boy from London. And with Elianne and Jane, Susie met him that morning to exchange possessions from their brief relationship together. It seems that Sentamu didn't bring anything to actually give back to Susie, because after she handed him a plastic bag with his things in it, he walked off without handing her anything. He did, however, come prepared to attack someone with a face mask, 2 pairs of gloves, and a kitchen knife. And as the judge pointed out, you must have picked up the knife deliberately, knowing that you were meeting girls who were not any physical threat to you at all.
The level of premeditation here is insane.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, 2 pairs of gloves, there's a lot of thought gone into it, I think. Elianne got fed up of waiting for Sentamu to hand over Susie's stuff. And so she grabbed the bag of Susie's things back off him. And this is quoting from the sentencing remarks here. He ran after her a short distance and caught her by a set of bus stops. In full view of the people milling about, you took your knife and stabbed her. She dropped to the ground and scrabbled around, trying to back away and fight you off while you continued to strike at her. You caused 4 knife wounds on her left shoulder, her right leg, and to the right side of her neck, severing the carotid artery. I mean, these are just kind of devastating wounds, really.
Once the artery's cut, it's just a case of bleeding out at that case. It's just so sad.
It's really sad. So, and yeah, even though Elianne received first aid at the scene from Samuel Sinclair, a bus driver who was a passenger on a nearby bus, and 3 London ambulance crews, her injuries were far too serious for her to be saved, and she died at the scene.
So this lovely bus driver, whose name was Samuel Sinclair, he rushes to her aid, and I think that's to be commended, because he didn't know if he was putting himself in danger and tried to save her life. So
yeah, absolutely.
And big respect to Samuel for that, but also to the 3 ambulance crews that fought to save Elianne's life. I can't imagine how difficult it was going away from that scene, having left a 15-year-old girl dead on the pavement. That must have been so hard.
Yeah, absolutely horrific. So Sentamu ran, and not only did he kind of run off aimlessly, he made kind of immediate attempts to conceal his crime. So he hid the knife behind a garden wall, and he threw away the mask and the gloves. He then caught 2 buses kind of in the direction of where he lived, but he was caught soon afterwards at 9:45 a.m. But when he was caught by police, he gave a false name and he gave a false location for the knife, despite the fact that the police clearly knew who he was and what he'd done because they're asking about a knife. He's still giving a false location for it. So I think it's clear signs of, obvious dishonesty, trying to mislead the police, but also, and the judge doesn't say this in her sentencing remarks, but realistically, I think his intention was to go back for the knife, and that's why he hid it. Otherwise, he would have been that as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
So there's quite a long quote from the sentencing remarks here, but I think it's a really there's some really powerful elements of this. So I'll read that quote now. Elianne Andam was 15 years old when you murdered her. She will always remain just 15. She will never realize the potential of her life. The court has heard moving tributes to a hard-working, happy girl who lived life to the full and made life worth living for those around her. The pain of her loss to her parents and younger brother is indescribable, and they feel it in every room of their home. There will be no more holidays, birthdays, and everyday life together, enriched by her joyful presence. Her father says she was a kind, beautiful girl who was always there for others when she was needed. Her mother recalls Elianne's big dreams to change the world, to become a lawyer and fight for justice. Her friend Susie says Elianne used to stick up for her and protect her. She has been left with post-traumatic stress disorder from watching her friend killed. The third girl with them, Jeanne, does not believe the trauma they suffered will ever diminish. A year after Elianne died, a large mural was unveiled in Croydon, close to the bus stop. It shows a lovely teenager full of life and purpose with a radiant smile. Its presence marks the determination of the community to declare to young men like you, as forcefully as they can, put the knives down. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, such a wordsmith. It is beautifully written, and it really demonstrates how full of life and vivacious Elianne really was as a person, and how much she is going to be missed.
Absolutely. And I think as well, the mention of her wanting to be a lawyer and fight for justice and ending up in a courtroom for nothing that she did is terrifying. It's horrible.
Yeah. I like the comment of put the knives down. You know, in the UK, knife crime is fairly rampant, and it is just terrifying to think that this 15-year-old girl goes out and ends up stabbed to death. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, it's terrifying. The judge then goes on to talk about Hassan Santamo himself, and she paints quite a disturbing picture of him. We should note that the judge in this case, Mrs. Justice Chima Grubb, also sentenced Nicholas Prosper, who we talked about in our last episode. And it's fair to say that we were somewhat critical of her for not giving Prosper a whole life order, although we put more of the blame on that for the prosecution, really. But credit where it's due. As Ellie's already said, such a wordsmith in terms of those remarks. But she sets out a lot of the reasons that people should have been concerned about Santamo long before he killed Elianne Andam. So she talks about his life, and I'm kind of going to paraphrase from the sentencing remarks. Santamo moved to England from Uganda when he was 5. He briefly went back to Uganda aged 11. Then he returned to the UK and said that he'd been physically abused while he was there. When he returned, he was said to be withdrawn. He harmed himself, and apparently unprovoked, would assault other children at school. So there's a referral made to Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services, to CAMS, which is, for our US and other listeners, a child psychiatrist, essentially. And they had what's described as intermittent contact with him after that. In November, when he was aged 11 or 12, Sentamu had to be disarmed when he took a knife to school, produced it in a lesson, and said that he wanted to kill himself. And for that, he received a youth conditional caution at the age of 12. There's a lot to unpack there.
Yes, there is. There's an awful lot to unpack there. I think it's extremely worrying that he only had intermittent contact with CAMS, although I am slightly surprised he had contact with CAMS, because they are usually so overrun and don't have the resources to handle cases the way that they should. Yeah, they should have been much more on the ball with him and making sure that he was mentally recovering from the physical abuse that he endured while he was in Uganda and all that kind of stuff, because it is incredibly worrying for a kid to take a knife to school and then in a lesson threaten to kill himself with it.
Yeah, this is really concerning stuff, and intermittent contact. I mean, as you say, that's might be better than one would expect from CAMS, but I mean, the fact that our expectations are that low is really not good. So from February 2019 to December 2021, Sentamu was in foster care after complaints about his mother's apparent neglect. She was bringing up a family of 4, and she said that Sentamu was out of her control. While in foster care, he used a knife to threaten a pupil who he thought was mocking him. He was excluded and placed in a pupil referral unit, the PRU, where his behaviour continued to be disruptive and aggressive. In June 2019, when he was back in a mainstream school, he threatened to stab another student with scissors. On another occasion, he assaulted 2 female pupils at the school and continued to express a wish to harm himself. I mean, we're seeing a clear escalation here, I think.
Yeah.
It goes from self-harm to threats to harm others, and still with knives and bladed items.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the fact that he's gone from harming himself to now harming others is particularly worrying, and seems just like the precursors to Elianne's murder. Like, all too common are these stories of people that commit these crimes, that there were all these red flags along the way and nothing was done.
Yeah, it's very concerning. So the judge then explains the sentence that she hands down, and she says the starting point for the minimum term for a murder committed by someone who's 17 years old is 14 years. Now, immediately, I've got concerns about this. 17 is virtually an adult.
Mm-hmm.
Why would the starting point sentence for murder be 14 years? If they've taken a life, I don't see how that's an appropriate starting point for a sentence.
Yeah, it's not.
Now, because Sentamu used a knife, there's an automatic 9-year enhancement. Although, as the judge points out, that wouldn't have applied when he was 16, and that also doesn't make much sense to me. It means there's not really a deterrent to carrying a knife at that age.
Not only does that not make sense to you, but it also makes little sense to the judge, which is somewhat reassuring that at least somebody at that level is saying this doesn't make sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And as well as being linked to the Nicholas Prosper case, in terms of the judge who's doing the sentencing, it's also linked in that autism comes up yet again here. I mean, there's quite a bit in the sentencing about this. So it says that Sentamu was diagnosed with a neurodevelopmental condition, autism spectrum disorder, in July 2019. The testing resulted in a score of 7 out of 24, which is at the very threshold for the diagnosis. When you were assessed again before the trial, your score was 9. And now, far be it from me to show any skepticism regarding why Santano's score went up before trial, but some might suggest there's some malingering going on there, faking it basically for his score to go up, when essentially it's beneficial to his defence, because his defence at trial was that he was guilty of manslaughter but not murder because he was autistic. And the judge rightly points out that this defence was rejected by the jury, and she also points out that the score of 7 is right on the line for being diagnosed.
I would personally be interested to know whether the same person conducted both assessments or whether it was different people, because different people will have different observations. However, it is very convenient. I will say that. Very convenient.
Yeah, absolutely. Talk here about some judgments made by Professor Blackwood, who is someone who assessed Santano. And the judge says, the driver of your actions was your short temper and your aggressive tendencies, described by Professor Blackwood as personality issues over which you have control, combined with your deliberate decision to carry a knife. This is confirmed by the fact that you were not in an emotionally disturbed state when you were arrested. And that's true. I was reading coverage of the trial, and a police officer testified that Santano was laughing and joking when he was arrested. So he's a long way from disturbed. And the judge continues, by that point you had phoned your friend Kay and communicated with another girl who you had planned to see later that day. Wow. Furthermore, a consultant child psychiatrist who saw you after your arrest concluded that there was no evidence of any acute mental disorder at the time. There is therefore an insufficient connection to be drawn between your mental health and this offence of murder. I can't criticise any of that.
No, I can't either. And I just want to reiterate that I don't think that autism should be used in the courtroom as a defence at all. I just don't. I don't buy it as a defence at all. Autistic people do know right from wrong. He knew right from wrong. Quite clearly, he knew right from wrong.
100%. I think it would be fair to say that Mrs. Justice Tumor Grub, has really given quite short shrift to arguments relating to autism in the sentencing of both Prosper and Santano.
Yeah, I agree.
Respect for that.
Yeah, definite massive respect for that.
Yeah.
I'm thankful for that, really, because she's rejecting the ridiculous notions that are put forward and saying, well, we know that's just not true, so try again.
Yeah. We do get into a little bit of mitigation here. The judge points out that in mitigation, Santano has no previous criminal convictions. I think that's debatable because he does have the conditional caution for taking the knife to school, and a caution is a conviction. But cautions are considered spent after 3 months. So, for example, it wouldn't show up on a basic criminal records check. And conditional caution from the age of 12 probably wouldn't be considered an aggravating factor anyway. So I think in some limited mitigation, I think that's a fair statement. But there is something that didn't appear in the judge's sentencing remarks. And I really think it should have. I think it should have. And this is from some media coverage of the trial. While on remand, Santano attacked a child at Oak Hill Secure Training Centre. He punched the victim in the face, knocking him to the floor. There's also an incident, and it's not clear if this is the same incident or a separate one, in which, when he was accused of killing girls, Santano responded by saying, "I'll do it again. I'll do it to your mum. Do you want to end up like her, 6 feet under? I'll do the same again." Yeah, and it's really hard to square that with the idea that Santano was showing remorse, which he apparently did in a letter to the judge. And, I'm sure he did write a letter in which he said some lovely words about how bad he felt. But actions matter more than words. Show us that you're changing rather than tell us. And his actions don't show that he's changed, in my view.
No, they absolutely don't. I think it's absolutely horrifying that he's in there attacking kids, saying that he'll kill their mums and that he'll do it again.
Yeah.
It's just, they've got a long way to go with him to make him safe to come back out after his sentence.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah. So the judge handed him a life sentence with a 23-year minimum term. So again, to explain kind of how the sentencing works, a life sentence is where you will spend the rest of your life on license, the rest of your life on license. But the minimum term is the amount of time you'll have to spend in prison. So 23-year minimum. And, I think on balance with all the circumstances here and what the law is, I think that's probably a fair sentence for Santami. But what do you think, Els?
Yeah, I think that given his age, given his mitigating factors, 23-year minimum is probably fair. And, it's not a guarantee that he'll get out after 23 years. He still has to go in front of the parole board and prove that he is safe to go back out into society. So, I think it'll be interesting to see how long he actually ends up in prison for.
Yeah, most definitely. That was a suggestion from Sue Barr. So thank you for that, Sue.
Yeah, thanks, Sue. That's brilliant.
The next case that we're looking at is Jordan and Ashley Henning. Ellie, do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, let's dive right in. So, Jordan and Ashley Henning were celebrating Ashley's birthday, but they got into an argument afterwards, and during that argument, and we don't know why, Jordan shot Ashley. He then walked over to the kitchen and reloaded his gun and calmly walked back over to where Ashley was laying and shot her again. There is no dispute that he was the gunman, but he was convicted of manslaughter, not murder. Why? That's a question that we're sort of gonna try and answer, but I don't know. I don't know how well we'll do. Yeah, I think there is a few things at play here. One of which is that Jordan Henning is white, Ashley Henning was black, and there was an all-white jury. Now, the victim, she doesn't have the right to a jury of her peers. The accused does. But if that wasn't enough, there is something else. The murder statute in Kentucky, where this case took place, it played a key role. And I'm going to read some of the statute to you. It reads, 1. A person is guilty of murder when A. With intent to cause the death of another person, he causes the death of such person or of a third person, except that in any prosecution, a person shall not be guilty under this subsection if he acted under the influence of extreme emotional disturbance, which there was reasonable explanation or excuse. The reasonableness of which is to be determined from the viewpoint of the person in the defendant's situation under the circumstances as the defendant believed them to be. However, nothing contained in this section shall constitute a defense to a prosecution or preclude a conviction of manslaughter in the first degree of any other crime. Ooh, a mouthful. This is a really weird statute. This idea of extreme emotional disturbance is like the insanity defense, but the standard for it is far lower than insanity. And not only that, insanity is an affirmative defense. You have to prove that you are insane. In this case, the burden of proof of the extreme emotional disturbance issue is on the state to prove the person wasn't suffering from it, which is a real problem for the state. So, Jess, what do you make of this extreme emotional disturbance?
I mean, I just don't. It's like if you're angry, you can murder someone, and it's not murder. That's. I know I'm simplifying it and kind of exaggerating it, I suppose, for effect, but that feels like what is happening here, and it's very concerning to me. I mean, heat of the moment crimes in other states are generally classified as second degree murder. Here, to stop it being murder and it becomes first degree manslaughter, I'm not keen on it. And the fact that the state has the burden of proof to prove someone is not suffering from it. Insanity, as you said, is an affirmative defense. You have to prove that you were insane at the time of the crime.
Yeah.
Insanity in that instance being defined as not knowing right from wrong. And the burden for the standard to demonstrate extreme emotional disturbance is essentially to put on some evidence of it, and the state has to disprove it. I mean, generally, it's hard to prove a negative. So
it is.
I'm not keen on this law. I'm not keen on the way this law is written at all.
It gets more interesting because Jordan claims that there was years of domestic abuse, and that would clearly constitute a reasonable excuse. But there was no evidence that Ashley was ever abusive to Jordan. Not having evidence of abuse doesn't prove there was none, but it's difficult to accept that the cameras in the home which recorded the shooting never showed an inkling of years of abuse. Throughout the trial, the defense repeated over and over again that Jordan was a soldier. Ashley was as well, but they don't mention that a lot. Perhaps it worked with the jury, but it does nothing for either of us. We don't care what his job was or how brave he might have been. It doesn't change the evidence.
It's hard to criticise the defence because they did what their role is. This wouldn't do anything for me as a juror.
No, me either. And they certainly wanted, that idea of he's a soldier, he's honourable, he's trustworthy, you can believe what he's saying.
Yeah.
This was all just a tragic mistake type situation.
Yeah.
To support their argument, the defense called a psychologist from the army as an expert witness. So Henning is a soldier in the army, and they call a psychologist from the army. In my humble, small opinion, allegedly, they're going to look out for each other. Don't come for me. All right?
Yeah, I think you're right.
So he testifies that Henning was suffering from extreme emotional distress. The defense asked him, there's been testimony here that that night he was in a rage and he couldn't even see what was in front of him. Would that be consistent with an extreme emotional disturbance? Psychologist said it would. Defense said, why is that? The psych said, well, I think just by definition that the state of being, so enraged and inflamed that it does impact your rational thinking, your judgment, and so you're not, processing and working in a normal way cognitively. The defense argument here is that being very angry is a defense to murder.
It's ridiculous.
So not only have they claimed that being very angry is a defense to murder, the psychologist also claims that Henning's combat training made him respond more reflexively in high-stress situations. What the defense are clearly suggesting is that he shot Ashley as a reflex. So just in case it wasn't very clear, we're both very skeptical of this psychologist's testimony. It was all directly connected to the decision that the jury were making on whether Jordan Henning was suffering from extreme emotional distress when he killed Ashley. And his expert opinion was yes, Jordan was suffering from an extreme emotional disturbance.
I have thoughts. I'm with you. It's relevant to the key question, really the only question that the jury are deciding on here, and because there's no dispute that Jordan Henning pulled the trigger. He did it on camera, but I am very skeptical of this testimony. The stuff about it being reflexive, I think that's only really tangentially related, to be honest. But I don't buy this extreme. I don't buy it as a defence in the law. I don't like it, and I don't really accept that Henning was suffering from one at the time. Just to be completely honest.
What I find the most interesting is, on one hand, they are essentially saying he didn't know what he was doing because he was blind with rage. And on the other hand, they're saying that he was in control enough to react as his training suggests he should react, to shoot Ashley. Now, if you ask me, the two can't be true at the same time. You're either blind rage or you're in control. And that baffles me a lot. Yeah, I find it really strange. And as a juror, that would have really grated at me. But Ashley's friend Jamie Savat also testified, and she said that Jordan had told her that he would fake PTSD if he ever needed to get out of trouble. And that's not a good look when he's currently on trial and using mental health as his defense.
This is wild to me. The jury were presented with direct evidence that Jordan Henning had premeditated his defense in case he ever needed it. Jordan Henning told someone, I am going to do this if I ever need to. And then he did this. He did the faking PTSD, allegedly. And the jury just
buys it.
I don't understand what they wanted. I don't understand what else the jury needed to get to murder here. I really don't.
Jimmy Watts testified that Jordan often told him about his 10 list of people he would kill in the apocalypse or if society collapsed. The idea is that if the world come to an end for any number of reasons, whether it's a societal collapse or an apocalypse event, that he will be protecting himself and looking out for himself first. And his list was the people he deemed to be a threat or could have supplies that he could use. The last time we talked about it was the Saturday before the day Jordan shot Ashley.
Wow. I mean, that's a strange thing to talk about, but people say strange things sometimes, and if it's a one-off, fine, I don't really think much of it. It's just unusual. But to talk about it all the time, and so soon before he killed Ashley, the jury was presented with plenty of evidence to think that this man was not just going through a sudden extreme emotional disturbance, that he had a history of this kind of violent kind of thinking and premeditation of a defense. And I don't get it.
No, I don't get it either. I think there's plenty of evidence to suggest that he murdered Ashley. However, Jordan Henning actually testified in his own defense. And during that testimony, we heard more about the abuse that he alleges that Ashley inflicted upon him. He repeats something we heard him say in the body cam video. She kept hurting him. Apparently, this included emotional pain, telling him that he wasn't a real man, and physical pain. He says Ashley kicked him down the stairs, hit him, and bit him. He also said that Ashley dragged him by the testicles for 10 feet, hit him, and had 2 male neighbours backing her up, one of whom said he was getting his gun. But what bad luck Jordan has, because apparently all of this was outside where there's no security camera. Both of the neighbours testified that it was Jordan, not Ashley, who was being aggressive, and neither of them ever saw any of the physical abuse that Jordan describes. Jason Bocker said Henning's son Carter came over and asked my daughter to get me. She said, my mum sent me over. She needs your dad's help. My dad is super mad at my mum and she needs you to come over. When he went over to their property, Jordan was drunk. Jimmy Watts came out of the house and said they needed to call 911 because Jordan Henning was angry and out of control. Jimmy Watts also became involved after one of the Henning children rang his doorbell asking for help. He said Jordan Henning was very angry and told him to get off his property. Jason Bocker testified that another neighbour, a retired military police officer, Robert Jennings, told him, Jordan's not right, we need to get out of here. So Jordan's testimony is that the neighbours were threatening him and Ashley attacked him and grabbed his genitals. The testimony from the witnesses and what was caught on video is very different. They argue and it gets louder and angrier. Ashley tries to get away from Jordan by going upstairs, but he follows her. The shouting goes on until shots ring off just out of camera. Then Jordan walks calmly towards the camera, reloads the gun, walks back to where Ashley is laying on the floor, shot, and shoots her again. And in one final moment of pure disrespect, he spits on her body.
What the fuck? Yeah, I don't understand it. How did the jury not find this man guilty of murder?
I don't understand it either.
I have a real problem with this verdict. It disturbs me on a really deep level that the jury saw what happened. They watched what happened. They saw that video and they heard testimony that he was planning to fake PTSD. They heard him testify to abuse that there was no evidence of happening, and they came back with this verdict. And I do think the statute is part of the problem here, but the jury had the option to return a guilty verdict here. They didn't. I think that the state proved that Henning was not suffering from an extreme emotional disturbance. I do.
Yeah, I do too, because like I said, I don't think that those two lines of defense mesh. You can't be cool and calm enough to respond to your training as a soldier, but angry enough that you're blind rage. The two don't make sense. And there was nothing angry about the way he walked over, reloaded the gun. That was all very methodical, very purposeful. And when he walked back, he seemed calm as anything when he shot her again.
Yeah. I mean, I saw after the verdict, before the sentencing, one of Ashley's relatives testified, and he called the jury cowards. And the judge understandably was not happy with that, but frankly, it's hard to disagree. I think this verdict is a massive injustice, and Henning has been sentenced to 20 years, of which he'll have to serve 17 years, and a minimum of 17 years, that is, and I just think that's not enough.
No, it's not enough. He committed a murder. He should be in for life without parole, personally.
Yeah, I agree with you.
So yeah, that's the case of Jordan and Ashley Henning, and we're going to move on to our third case. So our next case is Jeanne K. Whitefeather and Donald Lantz, and I think that Jess is eager to get into this one because it's quite the story.
Yeah, absolutely. So on January 29th this year, Jeanne K. Whitefeather and Donald Lantz, a white West Virginia farming couple, were found guilty of abusing their 5 adopted black children. Whitefeather was convicted of all 19 counts she was facing, including forced labor, human trafficking, and child neglect, as well as 4 civil rights violations based on race. Lantz was found guilty of 12 of the 16 charges he was facing, but acquitted of the 4 civil rights violations. The abuse included heavy labour, locking children in their bedrooms, forcing some of them to sleep on concrete floors, making them stand for hours with their hands on their heads, and also locking them in a shed kind of on the property. Deputy H.K. Burdett testified that he knocked on the shed's door on October 22nd, 2023, and that the teenage girl inside indicated that she was unable to open the door. After deputies forced their way in, the girl said that the defendants had brought food to her and her brother early that morning, and that they had been inside for about 12 hours with no contact from the couple. The girl also said that she and her brother were not allowed inside the house and were locked in the shed for long periods of time daily. The children were in dirty clothes and smelled of body odour, and the boy was barefoot and had what appeared to be sores on his feet. I mean, this is just horrible.
This is beyond the pale, honestly.
Yeah.
I wonder if their motivation to adopting 5 children was solely so that they could use them as slaves.
Yeah, that's how it feels. That's how it sounds. At an early bond hearing in the case, Whitefeather's brother, Mark Hughes, testified that the home was unfurnished because the family was in the process of moving to a larger home. And at the same hearing, Whitefeather's attorney, Mark Lantz, referred to the shed as a teenage clubhouse, said that there was a key inside the shed and that there was just a plain and simple misunderstanding about what is going on here, which echoes something that Whitefeather herself said. She told the deputies that the children liked the shed. I mean, this is just ridiculous. This is just false.
It's just barefaced lies to try and save their own necks. That's all it is. Barefaced fucking lies.
I mean, the fact is, when the police turned up and spoke to the children in the shed, they said, we can't open it. There was no key inside. And they didn't like it. They asked the police to get them out. It's not a teenage clubhouse. It's slaves' quarters. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, they're kids. They're supposed to have a childhood. Yeah. The fact that they are moving and they're just going to move somewhere more isolated so that they could get away with their crime.
And so one of the children, the oldest girl, who's now 18, addressed the court directly. The others addressed the court through letters that were read out, letters and impact statements that were read out by others. The oldest girl, now 18, addressed the court directly, telling Whitefeather, I'll never understand how you can sleep at night. I want you to know that you are a monster. The bravery to address the court after that is amazing.
What an amazing young woman to do that. I think she's fabulous. I think that she got to say her truth, and I really hope that helps in her healing journey from what has happened to her.
Definitely. During the sentencing, the judge, Mary Claire Akers, pointed to a pre-sentence report in which the couple blamed their real estate agent for not finding a place isolated enough. This is mind-boggling. And the judge said, but I guess you should have explained to your realtor that you needed an isolated place away from people so that you could continue to abuse your children. I mean, this is fire. She
is not pulling punches, is she? She's just going for it, and I love her for it.
She's not messing about. And she says, and these lines are quite, I mean, you said earlier about the judge in Elianne Andam's case, the sentencing of Santamo being a wordsmith. I think this judge certainly is as well. She said, you brought these children to West Virginia, a place that I know is almost heaven, and you put them in hell. This court will now put you in yours, and may God have mercy on your souls, because this court will not.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic statement. It's no more than they deserve. Honestly, what they did is one of those crimes that really, really hits me, because they're just kids and they're supposed to have a childhood, and they're supposed to grow into teenagers and go a bit wild and find themselves and become these incredible people. And they've been abused so much that finding out who they are is going to be an even longer journey for them.
So Jeanne K. Whitefeather received up to 215 years in prison, and her husband, Donald Lantz, got a term of up to 160 years. Whitefeather will be eligible for parole after 40 years and Lantz after 30. They're both around 60, so I think it's likely that they'll be in prison for the rest of their lives. And frankly, that is no more than they deserve.
No, it isn't. I love the prison terms of 215 years and 160 years. I think it's amazing that they worked that out. I think it's great. But that is absolutely the sentences that they deserve.
Like you said, what is the motivation for them adopting these children in the first place? It seems pretty clear that it's to have slaves. I think that's where the racial aspect comes in for the convictions of Whitefeather, the civil rights convictions. And I'm glad that the children in this case got justice.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Right, so can we come on to our last case? This is the case of Victoria Goodwin, which has been recommended to us by Sophie. So thank you for that, Sophie. Ellie, tell us this one. I think we've structured it the right way this week, because this one's a little bit less serious than some of the other cases we've looked at, isn't it, Ellie?
It is. It is a weird one, that is for sure. And just, spoilers, but no one dies in this. So although we're maybe taking it a little less seriously, nobody is dead in this case. So there's a show in the US called Ghost Adventures, presented by a few ghost hunters. Apparently they use the term demonologists, but I'm just going to say ghost hunters if it's all right with you guys. One of these ghost hunters is a guy named Aaron Goodwin, who's married to Victoria Goodwin, for now at least. And she's just been arrested on suspicion of solicitation to commit murder and conspiracy murder. Whatever possessed her, you might ask? She was apparently watching a true crime documentary and decided to write to the inmate shown in it, as you do on your average Tuesday. He's a triple murderer named Grant Amato, who stole $210,000 from his family and spent the funds on a webcam model from Bulgaria, who he met on a pornographic website. Then he shot his father, mother, and brother. The documentary appears to be called Control Alt Desire. While writing to him, she apparently fell in love with him and offered him $11,515 to kill her husband. Such a specific amount. She messaged him saying, "I told Aaron I was unhappy, but I just want out." In one of her particularly unhinged messages to the Florida-based inmate, she said, "Am I a bad person? Because I chose to end his existence, not divorce." Well, if that was a line in a film, you wouldn't believe it, would you? Yes, Victoria, that makes you a bad person.
Yeah, it really does.
Valid option. Divorce is a valid option. Amato messaged someone about the alleged plot. He's asleep right now in the hotel room. I need to know what's going on. Can I get an update? Was it done? Interestingly, when Victoria was confronted about the message she'd sent relating to sending Amato money, police say she claimed that she thought the money was for cell phones and mentioned that she and Aaron were going through some marital problems. No shit.
No shit indeed.
Victoria says she was daydreaming or fantasizing about being without her husband. Cops say she also told them that she didn't remember sending the messages and doesn't want her husband killed. Now, usually, of course, these communications would be monitored as Amato is in prison. However, in this instance, the messages were being sent on a contraband phone.
It's interesting that she says that these are fantasy messages, because firstly, that's an odd fantasy, but you know, you do you. But they're clearly not, allegedly, because she's told this guy, Grant Amato, where Aaron is going to be staying, and that's how he knows that he's in a hotel room, that he's asleep in a hotel room. This is, if it's a fantasy, you don't need that.
It's utterly bizarre. And she's currently being held on a $100,000 bond, and Aaron was completely blindsided by her arrest. He was told by police while they were filming, apparently with the camera still running. What I wouldn't give to see that footage. I'm nosy, I can't help it.
I know. Oh.
He has understandably filed for divorce and in fact has legal protection from her. She was barred from contacting him for 3 months. He's also suing her for over $10,000 for assault, false imprisonment, and being negligent in her marital actions.
Negligent?
Like, are we in the 1950s?
I know.
Was she having lots of headaches? Just too tired?
Being very, very tired. Oh, gosh.
I mean, more power to him for suing her. I would too. But it's just the wording is.
That line is weird. That line is weird.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, wow. The next series of Ghost Adventures might be interesting.
I think so.
This is such a bizarre story, and you know what? If she doesn't play out and this goes to trial, I really hope this is televised, because I will watch the shit out of this trial.
Yeah, I agree with you totally. Like, I would watch it too. I can't believe this has actually happened. Thank you, Sophie, for sending us in a sort of more light-hearted case to the ones that we usually cover. Again, we don't agree with conspiracy to murder or anything like that. It's just this particular case has some really odd aspects to it that we just can't help but find a bit amusing.
Yeah, and obviously it's very sad for Aaron Goodwin, and it's very bad what's happened. But I mean, there's some funny things about it. So yeah, thank you, Sophie, and also thank you, Sue, for sending in the recommendation for Elianne Andam.
Yeah, it's been brilliant to be back recording. If you want to request that we mention a case, then you can let us know via our social media. We're on X, Facebook, and Instagram at Version of Events, or you can email us versionofevents@gmail.com, or you can use the request a case form on our website, versionofevents.co.uk. And with that, know that we are going to be starting to record the Ellen Greenberg episodes very soon, so keep an eye out for those.
Yeah, it's been lovely recording today, and thank you guys for tuning in. Please give us a share and a 5-star rating, and we'll catch you again soon.
Bye, guys.
Bye.